In 1998, 12 students from Barton Ridge High vanished during a weekend trek in the hill country. Their campsite was found intact, their food uneaten, their boots still lined up outside their tents, but their footprints stopped, mid-trail, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. For 25 years, no one has solved what happened on the Barton Ridge Trail. Until now. Tonight, we're reopening the case, because disturbing new evidence has surfaced. If you're drawn to the dark corners of true crime and unsolved mysteries, subscribe and stay with us. The wind moved differently on Barton Ridge. Locals said it had a voice, a long, hollow note that shivered through the cedar breaks and limestone cliffs, carrying with it the uneasy feeling that someone, or something, was always following. Most brushed it off as folklore, another rural Texas ghost story. But for the families of 12 missing students, Barton Ridge was no myth. It was a wound that had never closed. Detective Henry Lark still remembered the call. He had been a young officer then, barely 3 years into the force, when dispatch reported a missing persons cluster. 12 kids, seniors from Barton Ridge High, had failed to return from a weekend trek. The parents, frantic, had waited in the school gymnasium while officers, park rangers, and volunteers swarmed the trails with dogs, lanterns, and radios. For 3 days, they searched. What they found was stranger than anyone expected. The campsite was undisturbed, almost eerily so. The circle of stones for their fire pit was cold, untouched. Tents stood neatly zipped, with sleeping bags still rolled inside. A stack of untouched trail rations sat in plastic tubs. Beside one tent, a spiral notebook with penciled sketches lay open to a half-finished drawing of cedar trees. But the most unsettling detail lay a quarter-mile down the trail. A set of footprints, 12 pairs, walking in single file, marched across a patch of soft dirt. They continued along the trail until the limestone took over. And then, nothing. The line ended mid-stride, as if all 12 had lifted into the air and vanished. No drag marks, no scattering, no struggle, just absence. At the time, the case spiraled into media frenzy. News vans choked the gravel parking lot at the trailhead. Reporters hounded grieving parents. Theories ran wild. Cult abduction, runaway pact, drug overdose, even alien intervention. But no bodies, no clothes, no trace of the 12 ever surfaced. Within months, the headlines faded. The trail was closed. The families mourned without closure. Now, in 2023, Henry Lark was no longer the young officer taking orders. He was retired, his hair gone gray, his badge tucked away in a drawer he rarely opened. Yet the case had never left him. He kept a cardboard box in his study labeled Barton Ridge. Inside lay photographs of the campsite, police reports with smudged ink, and one cassette tape. An interview with a local rancher who swore he had seen lights near the ridge the night of the disappearance. For 25 years, Henry's life had gone on, but the case had waited. And then, last month, the phone rang. "Detective Lark?" a woman's voice asked. "My name is Emily Santos. I was one of the students on the Barton Ridge trek. I never told the police what I saw, but I think it's time." Henry froze. He had read her name countless times in the file. Emily Santos, age 17, presumed deceased. "Miss Santos," he said carefully, "that's not possible." Her reply was a whisper, tight and trembling. "You're wrong. I'm alive, and I'm ready to talk." Henry sat in silence long after the line went dead. His pulse throbbed in his temples. If this was true, if even one of the missing 12 had survived, everything about Barton Ridge would unravel. The next morning, the old detective pulled the cardboard box from his study and spread its contents across the kitchen table. Photos, maps, transcripts, the spiral-bound sketchbook recovered from the scene. And, for the first time in years, he allowed himself to whisper the question he had buried. What really happened on the trail that day? Outside, the Texas wind rose against the house, slipping under the eaves with a sound almost like a voice, almost like laughter. The cafe was too bright for what she was about to tell him. Detective Henry Lark sat across from the woman who called herself Emily Santos, squinting against the fluorescent lights. 25 years of imagining her face as a 17-year-old, dark hair, wide smile from the yearbook photo, had not prepared him for the woman sitting in front of him now. Her hair was cropped close, streaked with premature gray. Her hands shook when she lifted the coffee mug, though her eyes stayed sharp, fixed on him with something between defiance and fear. "You don't believe me," she said flatly. Henry leaned back, folding his arms. "I don't disbelieve you, but you'll understand why I need more than a phone call." Emily gave a humorless laugh. "The world already buried me. You think I don't know what's in those reports? Presumed dead. Body never recovered. I read it all when I was hiding." Her words caught him. "Hiding?" She nodded, lowering her voice. "There are things I couldn't say. Things I saw on the ridge. If I had spoken up, they would have found me too." Just like the others, the air between them thickened. Henry studied her face. Drawn cheeks, skin weathered beyond her years. Trauma left a mark that no disguise could fake. He had seen it in soldiers, in battered spouses, in missing children recovered after too long. "What happened, Emily?" he asked softly. For a long time, she didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the window, where late afternoon traffic crawled down Main Street. Finally, she spoke. The trail disappeared. Henry waited, letting the silence stretch. He had learned long ago not to rush survivors. Emily's gaze snapped back to him. "You think I sound insane?" "Everyone always does. But I was there, Detective. I walked it. One moment we were following the path like normal. Me, Marcus, Janelle, all of us. And then, it wasn't there anymore. Just rock. Blank. Like the earth had swallowed the trail." Henry's throat tightened. He remembered the footprints ending mid-stride. That detail had haunted him for decades. "Where did you go?" he asked. Emily's hands gripped the mug so tightly he thought it might shatter. "Into the trees, deeper than we should have. That's when we realized something was following us." Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost drowned out by the hiss of the espresso machine. "It didn't want all of us." Henry opened his mouth to press, but she held up a trembling hand. "Not here. I'll give you what I can. But you need to understand, if you dig this up again, you'll put more lives at risk. Some things on Barton Ridge don't want to be found." Henry studied her across the table, the way her jaw clenched, the way her shoulders curled inward as though bracing for a blow. If this was a hoax, it was a cruelly convincing one. "Why now?" he asked finally. Emily's eyes filled with something that looked like grief. "Because I found something last week. Buried near the canyon. A shoe, size 6, pink laces. It was Janelle's. I couldn't keep quiet anymore." Henry's pulse kicked. He remembered Janelle Ortiz, varsity runner, braces, dimples in her yearbook photo. Her mother had waited at the search base for days until her knees gave out. "Where's the shoe?" he asked. Emily reached into her canvas bag and slid a Ziploc across the table. Inside lay a mud-caked sneaker, faded almost to gray. But the laces, though frayed, still showed a whisper of pink. Henry touched the plastic. His chest felt heavy, as if the years between 1998 and now had collapsed into a single breath. "Come with me," he said. "We'll take this to the station." Emily's head jerked. "No, not the police. Not yet. You remember what happened the first time. They searched and came back empty. If this gets out too soon, they'll close it again. Or worse, they'll bury it. I need you to look quietly before anyone else knows." Henry hesitated. Retired or not, he was no longer sworn, no longer bound by procedure. But the thought of reopening Barton Ridge alone chilled him. "Emily," he said slowly, If what you're telling me is true, then we're not just looking for evidence. We're walking straight into whatever took those kids." She met his gaze without flinching. "Exactly." The cafe noise receded in his ears. All he could hear was the wind in memory, the way it had moaned through cedar branches as officers packed up their failed search. He exhaled. "Then we start tomorrow." The ridge had changed in 25 years. Henry stood at the old trailhead, boots crunching gravel, staring at the weathered wooden sign that once welcomed hikers. Barton Ridge Trail, 7.3 miles. The sign was cracked now, letters bleached pale. A rusted chain strung across the entrance declared the path closed indefinitely. Weeds and cedar shoots crowded the ground where hikers once lined up for weekend treks. Emily waited beside him, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing that might catch her shine. Her eyes never left the trees. "You're sure about this?" Henry asked. She gave a short nod. "It starts the same way." It always starts the same way. Henry ducked under the chain. The air smelled of limestone and cedar, sharp and dry. For a moment he almost felt like he was back in uniform, walking with the search teams, radio crackling at his belt. They followed the trail for half a mile. Birds rustled overhead. Cicadas shrieked in the late summer heat. The landscape looked ordinary, until it wasn't. "Here," Emily said, stopping suddenly. Henry looked down. The dirt path ended abruptly at a stretch of pale limestone. The change was natural enough. Trails often cut across rock. But what froze him was the memory. He had stood here once before, staring at the exact place where 12 pairs of footprints had stopped. Emily knelt, brushing her fingers across the stone. "This is where it took them." Henry crouched beside her. The surface bore faint depressions, too weathered for detail, but just enough to hint at old weight pressing down. "Footprints," he murmured. "Not just footprints," Emily said. Her voice had gone hollow. "Traces of where we ended." Henry felt the old chill creep back through his bones. 25 years ago, he had told himself the prints were misread, that the trail crews and searchers had trampled the evidence. But now, with Emily's eyes on him, he knew she was right. Something unnatural had happened here. "What did you see after this point?" he asked quietly. Emily stood, scanning the tree line. "Not here. Too open. Come deeper, and I'll tell you." As they stepped off the limestone and into the cedar shadows, Henry felt the air shift. The wind fell away. The cicadas fell silent. For the first time in years, he understood why locals whispered about Barton Ridge. Because the silence sounded like waiting. The cedar branches closed in overhead, blotting out the sky. Henry kept his steps measured as he followed Emily deeper into Barton Ridge. Each crunch of gravel under his boots felt like an intrusion, like the land itself was listening. He glanced sideways at her, but she seemed to know the path without hesitation, her eyes forward, jaw set. "You've been back here before," he said. Her lips tightened. "Once, a year after it happened. I thought I could face it, but I barely made it past the ridge before turning back. It was like walking into a mouth ready to swallow me." Henry didn't respond. He knew better than to break survivors' metaphors. They spoke truths facts couldn't capture. The trail twisted downward, hugging the side of a canyon. Limestone walls rose pale and cracked, streaked with black moss. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Even the cicadas had abandoned this place. At a bend in the trail, Emily stopped. "This is where I first noticed it," she said. Henry scanned the ground. To him, it was just a scatter of rocks and cedar needles. "Noticed what?" She crouched and pointed at the base of a boulder. "The air." It shimmered, like heat above asphalt. Except it wasn't hot that day. Henry crouched too, running his palm just above the rock. The air felt no different to him. "I thought I was imagining it," Emily continued. "But Marcus saw it too." He joked that we'd found a portal. Everyone laughed, and then Janelle said she felt dizzy. Her voice caught on the name. Henry waited, giving her time. She leaned against that boulder, Emily went on, and her nose started bleeding. Not just a little. It poured. That's when we realized something was wrong. But by then, her words trailed off. She pressed her fingers against her temple as though warding off the memory. Henry's mind ticked through possibilities. Carbon monoxide from hidden caves, electromagnetic interference. He had read old case notes about nosebleeds among searchers, dismissed as heat exhaustion. Now the detail gnawed at him. What happened next? He asked. Emily's eyes hardened. The trees moved. Henry frowned. Moved. They shifted. Like they weren't rooted. We turned around and the trail behind us wasn't the same. Branches twisted. Trunks leaned across the path we'd just walked. It was like the woods wanted to hurt us deeper. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to keep speaking. That's when Marcus said we needed to mark our way. He tied strips of his t-shirt to branches, but every time we circled back, the strips were gone, or moved, or doubled. The trail didn't want us leaving. Henry stood, scanning the tree line. All he saw were gnarled cedar limbs, their bark shaggy and gray, their shapes bent by wind and drought. Yet, as he stared, he felt the uneasy illusion she described, like the trees were leaning closer, listening. He cleared his throat. And the others? What did they do? Emily's face crumpled. We argued. Some wanted to press forward, some wanted to camp until daylight, but it was still afternoon. Time was wrong, slipping. By my watch, we were there maybe 3 hours. By the sun, it was already setting. Henry exhaled. Temporal distortion. Another detail the files hadn't mentioned. He opened his notebook and jotted quickly. His handwriting trembled more than he liked. Emily touched his wrist. Writing won't help you here. Her tone wasn't mocking. It was warning. By dusk, they had pushed nearly 2 miles into the ridge. Henry felt sweat soaking his shirt, but the air remained unnaturally cool, as though the canyon breathed differently than the rest of Texas. Emily stopped again, eyes on the ground. This is where it took the first one, she said. Henry's chest tightened. Who? Tyler, she whispered. The class clown. He was walking behind me. 1 second he was cracking a joke about horror movies, the next... She snapped her fingers. Gone. Henry scanned the ground. Limestone, cedar needles, scattered rocks. No crevice large enough to swallow a boy. No blood, no torn fabric, just emptiness. We searched, Emily said. Called his name until our throats were raw. But the trees muffled us. Sound didn't travel. It felt like we were screaming into cloth. Her eyes glistened in the fading light. And then we heard him scream. Not from ahead or behind. From below, Henry's gaze shot to the ground. Limestone, solid, but he remembered sinkholes scattered across the hill country, limestone caverns that opened without warning. You think he fell? Henry said. Emily shook her head sharply. No, it wasn't a fall, it was pulled, like the earth wanted him. Henry stared at the ground until his eyes burned. He wanted to dismiss her words as trauma's distortion, but the files contained whispers of this too. Search dogs refusing to advance, handlers reporting vibrations underfoot. At the time, those details had been omitted from the official report. Too strange, too unbelievable. But Emily was giving them voice. What did you do? Henry asked quietly. Her answer was almost a sob. We kept walking. Night fell fast in the canyon. Henry's flashlight cut a narrow beam through the trees, but every shadow seemed to flinch at the edge of light. Emily walked close, her breath shallow. Why didn't you tell this back then? Henry asked. She turned on him, her expression raw. Would you have believed me? A 17-year-old girl saying the trail disappeared, the ground ate my friend. The trees moved. They would have called me hysterical. Or worse, accused me Henry couldn't argue. Even now, his rational mind rebelled. But his instincts, the ones honed by decades on the force, told him she was describing what she truly experienced. They reached a clearing where the ground dipped into a shallow basin. Henry's beam swept across something pale. He froze. "Emily," he whispered. She followed his light. There, half buried in silt, lay a bone, long, smooth, too large for an animal. Henry crouched, heart hammering. He brushed dirt away. A human femur. Emily gasped. "God, it's them." Henry forced himself to stay steady. One bone doesn't prove, but then his beam caught more. A cluster of bones scattered under cedar needles, ribs, a fragment of skull. The air turned colder. Emily clutched his arm. "We shouldn't have come here." Henry swallowed hard. His notebook trembled in his pocket. For 25 years he had lived with absence, no bodies, no closure. Now the truth lay in front of him, stark and pale under his flashlight. And yet the silence of the canyon felt heavy, as if something unseen had been waiting for them to find this. Henry rose slowly. "We'll mark the location." "Come back with a team." Emily shook her head violently. "No, you bring others here. They won't leave." Her certainty chilled him more than the night air. Somewhere beyond the clearing, the wind rose through the trees, carrying with it a sound that might have been branches rubbing. Or laughter. The forest had smelled different that day. Emily remembered cedar and sweat, the dry crunch of August grass beneath boots, and the sound of 12 teenagers laughing too loudly for the wilderness. She had been the quiet one of the group, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, pencils rattling in the tin she carried. Marcus walked ahead, tall and confident, the unofficial leader. Janelle kept pace beside him, her ponytail bouncing. Behind Emily, Tyler joked about ghosts in the canyon, making exaggerated moans until the teacher's aide, Mr. Parker, told him to cut it out. That was the last time the trail had felt ordinary. Now, sitting cross-legged on the dirt with Henry across from her, flashlight angled down between them. Emily let the memory spill out. "It wasn't supposed to be overnight," she said. "Just a long day trek. 7 miles in, 7 miles out. Mr. Parker promised our parents we'd be back before sunset. We even brought extra water to be safe. No one thought." Her voice faltered. Henry waited. He had long ago learned silence could be more powerful than any question. Emily rubbed her palms against her jeans as though warming them. We passed the limestone flats around noon. That's when the air shimmered. At first, I thought it was heat. But then Janelle's nose started bleeding, and Mr. Parker said we should rest. We sat under the boulders. Tyler pulled out his Walkman. Marcus checked the map. That was when I realized the compass needle wouldn't stop spinning. Henry's eyebrows rose. "You're certain?" "I watched it," she said fiercely. "I was close enough to see the needle quiver, jerk, and then spin until Marcus shut the lid. He told us it was broken. But his hands were shaking. Henry scribbled in his notebook, though his hand trembled. Emily's eyes went distant again. It should have been a warning. But we were 17. Invincible. The canyon felt strange, but strange was exciting. We didn't know we were already inside something that wanted us. The words lingered between them, heavy. By nightfall, back in 1998, the group had grown quieter. Emily remembered the way their flashlights carved weak cones of light through the cedars, how the air seemed thicker, muffling every sound. Even Tyler had stopped joking. "We should camp," Janelle whispered. "We're not finding the trail back." Mr. Parker resisted. He was young, barely 22, and eager not to appear incompetent. No. If we keep moving north, we'll hit the service road. The map's clear, just a few more miles, but the map no longer matched the land. Trails forked where none should. The limestone outcroppings repeated like a loop. When Marcus tied his shirt strips to branches, they returned minutes later to the same markers, only doubled. That was when panic set in, Emily told Henry. We weren't lost. We were trapped. Henry leaned forward, his flashlight beam edging across her face. What about Parker? Did he admit it? He tried, she said softly. But when Tyler vanished, he lost control. He screamed, ran in circles, tore at the dirt. We all did. And then, her voice cracked. She pressed her fists against her eyes until she steadied. Then the ground trembled. Just once. Like something huge had shifted below us, Henry felt his skin crawl. He remembered the rancher's taped interview, the man swearing he heard rumbling under the ridge that night. It had been dismissed as imagination. What did you see? Henry asked carefully. Emily opened her eyes, but they glistened. Nothing. That was the worst part. We never saw what took Tyler, just absence. One moment he was behind me, the next he wasn't. She lowered her gaze, and then his scream came from under our feet. Henry's throat tightened. He glanced toward the clearing where bones still rested under cedar needles. Emily's voice thinned to a whisper. That's when Marcus decided we had to run. Back in 1998, they ran blind. Branches lashed their faces, roots snagged their boots. The cedar canopy blotted out moonlight, so their flashlights bobbed wildly, beams catching glimpses of pale stone, startled owls, each other's terrified eyes. Emily had clutched Janelle's hand so hard her nails cut skin. She remembered Marcus shouting, remembered Mr. Parker crashing through brush, and always, behind them, the sound of branches bending, not breaking, bending, as though the trees themselves moved to follow. After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a hollow. Breathless, they collapsed in a circle, gasping. Emily drew her sketchbook against her chest, as if the paper could shield her. Marcus counted heads. 11. Emily still heard his voice. Ragged. Don't panic. Tyler's behind us. We'll find him, but no one believed. Now, in the present. Henry stared at her across the clearing. And the others? They kept going. Her jaw trembled. One by one. She didn't elaborate, not yet. Instead, she pulled her canvas bag close and withdrew the sketchbook. Not the original, she had lost that long ago, but a newer one. Pages filled with drawings she had redone from memory. She opened to a sketch of twisted cedars crowding together like ribs of a cage. This is what it looked like, she said. This is how the trail closed. Henry traced the lines with his eyes. The trees leaned, their limbs forming an arch that seemed almost alive. He felt a shiver, the same unease that had gnawed at him since stepping back on the ridge. Emily, he said quietly, if this is true, then the land itself is hunting, she finished. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the dark, something cracked, a branch, sudden and sharp. Both of them froze. Henry lifted the light, sweeping the tree line. Nothing, just cedar shadows. But Emily's face had gone pale. It remembers, she whispered. It always remembers when someone comes back. They didn't linger. Henry insisted on retracing their steps toward the trailhead before full dark trapped them. Emily walked stiffly, clutching her bag to her chest, her silence more unnerving than words. By the time they reached the rusted chain, Henry's shirt was damp with sweat, his notebook heavy in his pocket. He paused, glancing once more at the ridge swallowed by night. For the first time in decades, he admitted the possibility he had avoided. Barton Ridge wasn't just an unsolved case. It was alive. The motel room smelled of dust and stale air conditioning. Henry sat at the small laminate desk. Emily's sketch of the closing trees spread in front of him. The lamp's weak light deepened the shadows between the pencil strokes. The more he stared, the more the lines seemed to shift, as if the forest itself leaned closer. He rubbed his eyes. Fatigue had set in, but adrenaline kept him from sleep. He needed corroboration, something beyond a traumatized woman's memory. something that would let him believe or disprove without fully losing his mind. His phone vibrated. A text from his old partner, Karen Duvall. "Still awake?" Henry typed back quickly. "Need your help. Barton Ridge. Ever heard of compass failure?" Dots blinked, then her reply came, "Yes. Rangers reported it in '98. Said equipment went haywire? Why?" Henry's pulse quickened. Emily hadn't invented it. "Meet tomorrow? Coffee at Cedar's Diner?" A pause, then 8 a.m. Don't expect good news. The diner still carried its 1970s decor, red vinyl booths, coffee pots that never emptied, locals hunched over plates of eggs and gossip. Karen was already there, hair clipped back, a thick folder in front of her. Retirement had not dulled her eyes. They still scanned a room like radar. "You look worse than I expected," she said, as Henry slid into the booth. "Long day," he muttered. "What's in there?" She tapped the folder. "Everything I salvaged before the county shelved the case. Reports, search logs, witness statements." She opened it, flipping to a page. "See this?" Ranger McAllister filed that compasses spun at the ridge. The search dogs wouldn't go past mile marker 7. Kept whining, pulling back. He swore the ground trembled at night. Henry leaned closer. The report was yellowed, but the words were clear. Why wasn't this taken seriously? Karen's mouth tightened. Because it sounded insane. The sheriff at the time didn't want ghost stories in his files. He pushed it off as stress, bad weather, faulty gear. Henry thought of Emily's white knuckles, her whisper about the earth hunting. What about survivors? Anyone else come forward? Karen shook her head. Just Emily. She stumbled out 3 days later, barefoot, dehydrated, hysterical. Kept saying the trees closed. Nobody listened. Parents wanted answers, not myths. She slid another page across the table. But one detail always bothered me. When search teams combed the ridge, they found markers. Torn strips of fabric tied to branches. Multiples, like the same shirt had been torn over and over again, farther apart than one person could have done in the time window. Henry's stomach dropped. Marcus, you're saying the markers duplicated? Karen raised an eyebrow. I'm saying they shouldn't have been there. Not in those places, unless someone, or something, was moving them. The clatter of plates from the kitchen snapped Henry out of his trance. He lowered his voice. Karen, Emily swears she saw the ground swallow one of them. Tyler. Heard his scream underneath. Karen went still. For the first time, her hardened expression faltered. That matches what McAllister said. What do you mean? She leaned in. After the official search ended, he kept going back on his own. Said he'd stand on the limestone flats and hear voices under his boots. Kids' voices. Like they were still down there. Henry felt ice in his veins. Karen's hand closed the folder. That's why I never went back. Some cases, you don't chase them. They chase you, but Henry wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. That afternoon, he drove out to the ranch where Ranger McAllister had retired. The property was wide, dotted with sagging sheds and horses that lifted their heads as his car pulled up. The ranger himself answered the door. White beard, skin weathered like bark. His eyes narrowed when Henry introduced himself. You're here about the kids, McAllister said flatly. Not a question. Henry nodded. I need to understand what you saw. The old man's gaze swept past him, toward the cedar ridge rising faint in the distance. Still calls to you, doesn't it? Once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. Henry swallowed. Tell me. McAllister motioned him inside. The cabin smelled of tobacco and old wood. On the mantel sat a row of compasses, each with a cracked glass face, needles frozen askew. I took those out there myself, McAllister said. Everyone spun wild until it broke. Brought them back as proof. Sheriff said I tampered with them. He barked a humorless laugh. Henry approached the compasses. Their needles pointed in no consistent direction. He felt a weight in the room, as though the ridge's gravity stretched this far. "What about the voices?" he asked. McAllister's jaw clenched. "You don't want to know." "I have to." For a long moment, the ranger stared into the cold hearth. Then he spoke, voice raw. "I went back the year after, couldn't sleep without hearing them. Took my hound, Daisy. We stood on the flats at midnight, wind was dead still, and then—" his eyes watered. "I heard crying, like a girl calling for her mama. I dropped to my knees, pressed my ear to the rock, clear as day, voices below, begging, screaming, some too faint, like they were farther down. Daisy howled until I dragged her away. Henry's skin prickled. Did you report it?" "No one believed me the first time." McAllister's hand shook as he lit a cigarette. "After that, I stopped trying." Henry glanced again at the line of broken compasses. "You think they're still there?" "The kids?" McAllister blew out smoke, eyes hollow. "Not the way you mean." Driving back, Henry gripped the wheel hard. The pieces refused to fit into ordinary logic. Duplicated markers, voices under stone, a woman whose memories matched both. Emily waited at the motel when he returned, sitting stiffly on the bed with her bag in her lap. She studied his face the instant he walked in. "You found him," she said, not a question. Henry closed the door. "He heard voices, just like you described." Something flickered in Emily's expression, relief, dread, maybe both. "Then you believe me now," she whispered. Henry sat across from her, heavy. "Belief isn't the word. But I know you weren't alone out there, and whatever swallowed those 12 students—" His voice dropped. "Isn't finished." The room hummed with silence. Emily opened her sketchbook again, flipping to a page she hadn't shown him. A drawing of limestone cracked open like a mouth. Figures falling into it, their arms outstretched. Beneath, she had scrawled one sentence: "It never lets go." Henry stared at the page until the lines seemed to shift, until he almost heard the muffled echo of children crying through stone. The room's only light came from the bedside lamp, casting half of Emily's face in gold and half in shadow. She held her sketchbook closed against her knees, her gaze fixed somewhere decades away. Henry didn't interrupt. He pressed the recorder on his phone, the quiet red light glowing, then leaned back in the chair. Emily exhaled, slow. "You want to know what happened after Tyler?" "After the ground took him," Henry nodded. Her voice dropped to a whisper, as though she feared the walls themselves might hear. "Nothing was ever the same." In 1998, the canyon air cooled sharply that night. Their small group, now 11, clustered beneath leaning cedars, flashlights trembling in their hands. Mr. Parker tried to steady them. "He just got separated." Trails twist. At first light we'll find him, but even he couldn't hide the way his lips quivered, or how his hand jerked each time a branch shifted overhead. Marcus crouched low, tying another strip of shirt to a branch. "We need markers," he said. "We keep moving till dawn. Standing still is worse." "No," Janelle shot back. "We should stay put. If we keep running, we'll get more lost." Their voices rose, overlapping, the panic raw. Emily sat apart, sketchbook clutched to her chest, trying to scratch lines into the page by flashlight glow. She didn't know why, maybe because drawing kept her tethered when reality bent. But when she lifted her eyes, she froze. The last strip Marcus had tied, a piece of his plaid shirt, fluttered on the cedar behind them. She was certain they hadn't passed it, yet there it was, swaying gently as if mocking them. She wanted to tell Marcus, to point it out, but the words stuck in her throat. By then the air had begun to hum again, faint at first, like a current through stone. Emily closed her eyes as she spoke to Henry. "That hum, it wasn't sound, not really. It was in our teeth, in our bones. Some of us covered our ears, but it didn't matter. It was inside us. Henry scribbled furiously in his notebook, jaw set. And then, her hands tightened on the sketchbook. Then Jenna disappeared. Jenna, the girl with copper hair and freckles, had been right behind Emily. She had muttered she felt dizzy, that the hum was making her sick. Marcus reached for her elbow. "Stay close," he said. But when Emily blinked, Jenna was gone. Just gone. Her flashlight lay on the ground, beam tilted up into branches that swayed without wind. Janelle screamed. Mr. Parker cursed, tearing through the brush, shouting Jenna's name until his voice cracked. Emily didn't move. She couldn't. She swore the cedar roots where Jenna had stood twitched, curling like fingers pulling back into the soil. 2 in one night, Emily whispered in the present. Tyler under the ground, Jenna into the trees. We didn't say it out loud, but we knew it was different each time. The canyon wasn't killing us the same way. It was choosing. Henry's throat was dry. Choosing what? Emily lifted her gaze, eyes shining. Choosing how to take us. By dawn, 4 of them had vanished. Tyler, Jenna. And before sunrise, Ben and Lacey, boyfriend and girlfriend, inseparable, were simply no longer there when Marcus did another count. Their sleeping bags lay unzipped, still warm. Their shoes gone, as if they had walked out together. Except there were no tracks. The ground around their campsite was undisturbed. Emily remembered Mr. Parker clawing at the dirt in desperation, insisting they must have sleepwalked, must have wandered off. Marcus kept yelling at him to stop, his voice cracking with a fear he couldn't hide anymore. Janelle sobbed openly. Others stared blankly, shock carving hollows in their faces. And Emily sketched. Hands shaking, she drew the cedar grove with 2 empty sleeping bags at its center. When she looked at it later, the lines seemed wrong. Bent, off balance. The trees in her drawing leaned inward, as if watching. Henry leaned forward. 4 gone in less than 12 hours. And the others? Why didn't you try to run? Leave the ridge? Emily gave a broken laugh. Run where? Every path looped. Every trail we took bent back. The markers multiplied. Marcus tied strips until his shirt was rags, but they appeared in places he swore he hadn't been. The canyon was folding around us. Her nails dug crescents into the sketchbook cover. We weren't lost. We were trapped inside something that knew we were there. Henry forced himself to breathe evenly, though his skin prickled. And you survived. Emily's mouth trembled. That's the worst part. I survived because it let me. In 1998, panic drove them by noon. Mr. Parker raved, insisting they needed to scale the ridge wall, get higher ground. He scrambled up loose limestone, hands bloodied from grabbing jagged rock. The others watched from below, hope flickering. See? He shouted down, voice wild. It's not impossible. Then the ledge shifted. Not crumbled, shifted, as if the rock itself shrugged him off. Emily still heard the sound. A hollow groan, then Mr. Parker's scream as he pitched backward, vanishing into a tangle of cedar branches. They rushed to where he fell. Nothing, no body, just broken branches, some still wet with sap. Marcus dragged his hands through his hair, face pale as chalk. It doesn't want us to leave, he muttered. No one argued. Back in the motel, Henry shut his notebook with a snap. He couldn't take more, not tonight. Emily's voice had grown ragged, her shoulders hunched as though the memory pressed her into the mattress. That was 6 gone, she whispered. Half of us, before the second night even came. The recorder's red light blinked, marking every word. Henry switched it off, heart hammering. He had come here chasing a cold case. Now he wondered if he was documenting something still alive. The second night was worse. Emily told Henry this with her eyes fixed on the motel carpet, her voice so low he had to lean forward to catch it. The canyon never slept. It changed after dark, like it was awake, watching us. Henry resisted the urge to ask a dozen questions. He let her unravel the memory at her own pace, the recorder running. In 1998, the survivors huddled close around the dim glow of 3 flashlights. The batteries were already fading. 6 gone. Only Emily, Marcus, Janelle, Sarah, Devin, and Caleb remained. No one spoke for a long time. The silence was not emptiness, but pressure, heavy and humming, as if the air between them was thick with invisible current. Finally, Sarah whispered, "We can't stay here. It knows where we are." Marcus shot her a look, eyes hollow but fierce. "And where do you think we'll go? Every path leads back." "Then we don't take paths," Devin snapped. His jaw was clenched, sweat shining at his temples. "We cut through. We make our own." Janelle shook her head violently. "No, that's exactly what it wants, splitting us up, making us stray." "Tyler strayed because we followed Parker," Devin shot back. "He's dead because of—" "Stop!" Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. The group fell quiet, but distrust lingered, sharp as knives. Emily curled tighter against her sketchbook. She had drawn the grove again, but each time the trees leaned closer, their limbs tangling like arms. She wanted to rip the page out, but something in her hand wouldn't let her. As night deepened, the hum began again. This time it rose in waves, pulsing through the soil like a slow heartbeat. They covered their ears. It didn't help. Emily paused, shivering even under the motel's air conditioning. "It wanted us to argue," she said. "It wanted us to break apart, and it worked." Henry's pen stilled above his notebook. "What happened?" Emily's eyes glistened. "Devin and Caleb vanished next." They vanished in rage. Devin had stormed off first, muttering curses, flashlight beam bouncing erratically as he disappeared between trees. Caleb ran after him, shouting for him to come back. The others waited, breathless. 10 minutes, 20. Then a scream ripped the night. It wasn't fear, it was agony. Then silence. Marcus wanted to follow. Janelle grabbed his arm, nails digging in. "Don't you dare!" Emily sat frozen, unable to move or speak. She remembered only the way their flashlight beams faded, swallowed by the forest, until nothing remained but blackness. Now, in the present, Emily's voice broke. "We never saw them again. Just silence, like they'd never been born." Henry swallowed hard. "And then there were 4. Emily nodded. By midnight, Janelle had stopped crying. She sat rigid, staring into the dark, whispering words Emily couldn't hear. Marcus paced, muttering about maps, about how he should have brought better gear, about how Parker was a fool. His anger filled the clearing, but underneath it, Emily heard terror. Thin, reedy. Sarah tried to pray, but when she knelt, the ground beneath her shifted slightly, as if something writhed beneath the soil. She scrambled back, sobbing. That was when Emily saw the shapes. Not bodies, not shadows. Something in between. Dark figures moving just beyond the edge of the flashlight's reach. They seemed human in form, but wrong in the way they bent, leaning too far, their arms too long. Each time the beam jerked toward them, they vanished. But she knew they hadn't gone. They were circling. "Do you see them?" she whispered. No one answered. Emily's nails dug into the sketchbook now, her knuckles white. Those things weren't people. But they knew how to look like people if you didn't stare too hard. Henry wrote the words down, hands shaking. "And the others?" "Marcus, Janelle, Sarah." Emily stared at the wall, as though afraid to speak their names. Not all of them made it to morning. The scream came near dawn. Sarah. One moment she was sitting against a tree, eyes red from crying. The next, her body jerked upright as though yanked by invisible hands. She rose to her toes, choking, clawing at her throat. Marcus and Janelle rushed forward. Emily stayed frozen, heart battering against her ribs. Sarah's body lifted inches from the ground, head tilted back, mouth open in a silent shriek. Then she dropped, limp. They scrambled to her, shook her, slapped her face. But when Marcus pressed his ear to her chest, he pulled back with tears streaking his cheeks. "Nothing," he whispered. Janelle wailed. Emily didn't move. She could still see faint marks around Sarah's throat, as though fingers had closed there, fingers that weren't visible. Emily's voice shook as she told it now. "She died right in front of us. No warning, just—" Snatched Henry's stomach turned, bile creeping at the back of his throat. He pressed his pen to paper hard enough to almost tear it. "3 left," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "Just Marcus, Janelle, and me." In 1998, dawn brought no relief. The hum faded, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Marcus looked older, his eyes bloodshot, his lips cracked. He pulled Janelle close, whispering that he'd get her out, that he'd find a way. She clung to him like he was the last solid thing in the world. Emily sat apart, her sketchbook open to a fresh page. She tried to draw Sarah, but the pencil wouldn't obey. Every time she pressed it to paper, it traced not Sarah's face, but the shape of branches, knotted and curling. When she looked down, she realized the drawing was not hers. The lines were too steady, too purposeful, like someone else had guided her hand. She shut the book with a gasp. Janelle stared at her. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," Emily stammered. Nothing." But when she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The trees leaning, their limbs bent like fingers clutching at prey. Emily fell silent in the motel room. Her breath hitched, her grip on the sketchbook so tight Henry thought the spine might snap. "Stop there," he said gently. "We can pause." She shook her head. "No, you need the whole story. You need to know why I was the only one left." Her eyes lifted to his, raw and haunted. "It didn't just take them, Henry. It made me watch." Emily's hands shook so badly, she set the sketchbook aside on the motel bed. For the first time since she began speaking, she looked directly at Henry. "You want to know how I survived?" she said, her voice thin. "But the truth is, I didn't survive. Not really. Something walked out of that canyon, yes, but it wasn't the same girl who went in." Henry's throat felt tight. He let her gather herself. She drew a deep breath, then began. In 1998, the canyon's third dawn broke pale and colorless, as if the sky itself was drained. Only 3 of them remained. Marcus, Janelle, Emily. The world had shrunk to the small circle of their fear. No more jokes, no more arguments, just silence, except for the whisper of branches. They hadn't eaten since Tyler vanished. Food seemed irrelevant now, tasteless, like chewing dust. All they wanted was out. Marcus took charge. His voice was hoarse, but his authority held. "We head east, no matter what happens. Straight line until we hit the river." Janelle nodded, clinging to his arm. Emily followed, clutching her sketchbook through the pages inside terrified her. Every time she opened it, the drawings had grown darker. Shapes between trees, mouths in the ground, figures bent at impossible angles. She swore she hadn't drawn them. Yet there they were, black pencil digging into the paper as though carved by something else. She stopped looking. She just carried it. They walked for hours. The markers Marcus tied now appeared ahead of them before he could place them. Torn fabric hung from branches they hadn't reached yet. At first he swore, tore them down. But after the 5th or 6th time, he stopped fighting. His face went blank, lips pressed white. Janelle whispered to him, "It's playing with us." He didn't answer. Emily's voice cracked in the present. "That was the moment I knew it wouldn't let us leave. It was keeping us until it was done." Henry's pen hovered uselessly above the page. He had stopped writing, just listening, each word like a weight in his chest. Near nightfall, they came to the canyon wall. Pale limestone rose sheer, streaked with veins of darker rock. Marcus touched it with both palms. "We climb," he said. His voice was steady but desperate. Janelle shook her head violently. "It killed Parker when he tried." "We don't have a choice," Marcus snapped. Emily stood back, staring at the stone. To her eyes, it shifted faintly. Lines curving, shadows deepening, like the wall wasn't solid, but breathing. But Marcus was already climbing. He hauled himself up with trembling arms, boots scraping. Janelle cried out for him to stop, but he ignored her. Halfway up, his foot slipped. He dangled, cursing. Then the wall moved. Emily swore she saw it. The limestone bulged outward, then cracked like a mouth opening. Marcus's scream tore the air as the rock swallowed him whole. One instant, he was clinging to stone. The next, he was gone. Janelle's shriek echoed through the canyon. She fell to her knees, clawing at the ground. Emily stood frozen, horror rooting her to the spot. The wall smoothed over. No sign of Marcus remained. Emily's voice in the motel dropped to a rasp. The canyon ate him. I saw it close around him, like it had been waiting. Henry rubbed his temple, bile in his throat. He wanted to disbelieve, but her words aligned with everything. McAllister's voices, the vanished footprints, the unnatural silences. "Then it was just you and Janelle," he said quietly. Emily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Janelle broke that night. She wandered in circles, muttering Marcus's name, scratching her arms until they bled. Emily followed her, begging her to sit, to rest. But Janelle only shook her head, hair wild, eyes glassy. Near midnight, the figures returned. Shadows between trees, tall and bending, moving without sound. Emily grabbed Janelle's wrist. "Don't look at them," she begged. "Don't!" But Janelle looked. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened in a soundless scream, and she tore free of Emily's grip. She ran straight into the cedar darkness. Emily chased her, branches clawing her face, but Janelle was fast. Too fast. Her outline flickered between trees like something already fading. Then the shadows closed around her. Emily saw them, long arms, dark limbs, shapes that weren't shapes. They folded around Janelle, and she was gone. The forest went silent. Emily stumbled to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Now she was alone. In the motel, Emily covered her face. "I don't remember how long I lay there. Hours, maybe days. The sketches kept appearing in my book. Drawings of me, alone. Drawings of the canyon with no end. And then, one morning, she dropped her hands. Her eyes were hollow. The trail was just there again, like nothing had ever happened. Sunlight, birds, the sign at the trailhead in the distance. I walked out barefoot, bleeding, starving, and everyone called me crazy. Henry sat frozen. His notebook lay forgotten on his lap. "You never went back," he said finally. Emily shook her head. "Not until now. Not until I found Janelle's shoe buried near the canyon. It wanted me to come back, to finish what it started." She leaned forward, her voice raw. "And now you've seen it too. You felt it, that silence, that waiting." Henry's pulse thudded in his ears. He thought of the bone in the clearing, the broken compasses on McAllister's mantle, the way the trees had seemed to lean closer when he first stepped past the limestone flats. He closed his notebook, his hands trembling. The Barton Ridge case was no longer about finding answers. It was about surviving the questions. The motel room was silent after Emily's confession. She sat curled on the bed, clutching her knees, her eyes rimmed red. Henry paced. His body wanted rest, but his mind was wired. Restless. He couldn't shake the image of Marcus pressed into stone, Janelle swallowed by shadows. He couldn't shake the way Emily said, "Now you've seen it too." He needed proof. By morning, he was already driving to town. The hardware store owner raised an eyebrow as Henry dropped items on the counter. 3 compasses, a handheld digital recorder, chalk sticks, and a pack of batteries. "Going hiking?" the man asked. Henry forced a smile. Something like that. On impulse, he added a spool of bright orange surveyor's tape. If the forest twisted trails the way Emily described, he wanted a marker it couldn't easily mimic. Back at the motel, Emily watched him lay out the gear. "You're going back," she said flatly. Henry didn't answer at first. He tested the compasses, each needle aligning neatly north. He clicked the recorder on, hearing the soft hiss of static. He tore strips of tape, sticking them in his pocket. Finally, he said, "I have to see for myself." Her voice sharpened. "That's exactly what it wants." Henry looked at her. Her eyes were wild, but behind the fear was a plea. "If you go back," she whispered, "it won't let you leave." Not like last time. Henry tightened the strap on his watch. "Then I won't go alone. You're coming with me." Her breath caught. For a long time she stared at him. Then she closed her sketchbook, slid it into her bag, and nodded once. The ridge looked different in daylight, yet the same unease seeped through the air. Henry ducked under the rusted chain, recorder clipped to his jacket, compass in hand. Emily followed close behind, silent. Half a mile in, he checked the compass. The needle pointed north. He exhaled. Ordinary, rational. But by the limestone flats, the needle twitched. Henry held it steady. The needle spun, hesitated, then whirled in a frantic circle before sticking east. His stomach dropped. He pulled a second compass. Same result. Emily's voice trembled. "Now, do you believe me?" Henry didn't answer. He just turned on the recorder, letting it capture the silence. They marked their path with tape. Henry tying bright strips to branches every few feet. Neon orange against gray cedar. Impossible to miss. But 20 minutes later, the tape appeared ahead of them. Henry froze. A strip fluttered from a branch directly in their path. He touched it with trembling fingers. Same knot, same tear at the end. "I tied this," he whispered. Emily's hand closed around his wrist. "I told you." The recorder hissed softly in his pocket. By midday, they reached the clearing where Henry had found the bone. It was gone. He dropped to his knees, shoving cedar needles aside, dirt caking his nails. Nothing. The pale rib fragment he had uncovered last time had vanished without trace. Emily stood rigid, her face drained. "It doesn't like you marking it," she whispered. "It doesn't want to be mapped." Henry sat back on his heels, chest heaving. He had expected to confirm Emily's story, not to feel the ground shift under the weight of it. He pulled out his notebook, scrawling furiously. Evidence removed. Deliberate? Supernatural? Unknown. The compass spun again in his pocket. By late afternoon, the silence deepened. Henry stopped walking, realizing suddenly that the forest had no birds, no wind. Even his footsteps seemed muffled, as though the air was thick. The recorder hissed louder. He pulled it out, checked the levels. Spikes trembled across the display, though neither he nor Emily had spoken. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Emily cocked her head. Her face paled. "Voices." Henry strained. At first it was just static. Then faintly, he heard it too. Thin, distant, like children crying through walls of stone. He nearly dropped the recorder. "Henry," Emily whispered. Her hand dug into his sleeve. The trees ahead had shifted. He knew the trail bent right, but now it bent left. The trunks leaned differently, their shadows rearranged. The tape marker he had tied only minutes before now dangled in a new place, as if the forest had pivoted around them. Henry's pulse roared in his ears. "Stay calm," he muttered. "It's tricks. Just tricks." But the word tricks felt childish, pathetic. The recorder hissed louder. Then, clear as day, a voice rasped from its speaker. "Stop running." Henry's blood froze. Emily clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. The voice came again, softer, layered with static. "Stop running." Henry snapped the recorder off. His hands shook so hard he nearly dropped it. The silence afterward was worse. They left the ridge before nightfall, stumbling back toward the trailhead like fugitives. Henry didn't stop until the rusted chain was behind them, the parking lot empty under the lowering sun. He bent over, hands on his knees, gasping. Emily stood beside him, trembling. "I told you," she whispered. "It never lets go." Henry straightened slowly, gripping the recorder like a weapon. The compasses in his pocket were both cracked, glass faces spider-webbed. For the first time in his career, Henry Lark had no rational explanation. And for the first time, he feared the case wasn't about finding the missing. It was about making sure more didn't vanish. Henry couldn't sleep. The recorder sat on the motel nightstand, its red light like a watchful eye. He had replayed the voice twice, each time certain it hadn't been his imagination. The words were faint but distinct, like a breath against his ear. "Stop running." Emily slept fitfully across the room, her sketchbook open on the bed beside her. Even in slumber, her hands twitched as though still drawing. At dawn, Henry gave up on sleep. He dressed, pocketed the recorder, and drove into town. The Barton Ridge Historical Society was a squat brick building with a dusty display of arrowheads and ranching tools in the window. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon polish. The clerk behind the desk, a wiry man with white hair, glanced up from his newspaper. "Help you?" Henry flipped open his old badge wallet. He wasn't on duty anymore, but sometimes the gesture still opened doors. Henry Lark. "Retired detective. I need to see archives on Barton Ridge." The man's eyes flicked to the badge, then back to Henry's face. For a second, something tightened in his expression. "Barton Ridge, you say?" "That's right. Trail's been closed for years. Nothing to see there." Henry leaned on the counter. 12 students disappeared in 1998. That case doesn't vanish just because the trail's closed. The clerk's jaw worked. "You lawmen never learn, do you? Some things don't want digging up." Henry held his gaze until the man sighed and led him to a back room lined with metal filing cabinets. The Barton Ridge file was thinner than Henry expected. Newspaper clippings, a few photographs of search parties, a map with red pencil circles. But half the pages were missing. He flipped through, frowning. "Where are the ranger reports?" The clerk shrugged. "What you see is what we got." Henry knew better. He remembered the paperwork Karen had shown him. Dog reports, compass anomalies, McAllister's statements. None of it was here. "These were pulled," Henry said flatly. The clerk said nothing. Henry pressed. "By who?" The old man's lips thinned. "You should ask the sheriff. Or maybe the school board. Folks don't like the Ridge discussed. Brings bad luck." Henry slid the folder shut. "Bad luck doesn't erase government records." The clerk's eyes were tired. "Maybe not, but fear does." At Cedar's Diner, Karen Duvall sat with a cup of coffee, already watching him as he walked in. "You look like hell," she said. Henry slid into the booth. "Archives are gutted. Ranger reports gone. Witness statements missing." Karen stirred her coffee slowly. "I told you. They didn't want it on record. A disappearance that big. It could have destroyed the town. Tourism, land value, the school, everything. Easier to call it unsolved and move on." Henry's jaw tightened. "That wasn't incompetence?" "That was a cover-up." Karen met his eyes. "You're just realizing that now?" He sat back, exhaling. "I heard a voice yesterday, out there. On my recorder, Karen's spoon clattered against her mug. Don't play with me, Henry." He pulled the recorder from his pocket, set it on the table, pressed play. Static filled the diner's hum. Then, faintly, a voice. "Stop running." Karen's face drained. She snapped the recorder off, shoved it back toward him. "Turn it off. Don't you dare play that in here." Her hands trembled. Henry had seen her stare down armed suspects without flinching. He had never seen her shake. "What do you know?" he demanded. Karen's eyes darted to the window, then back. McAllister wasn't the only one who heard them. Some of the searchers did too, but they shut up fast after the sheriff warned them. And the families, God, the families wanted closure, not ghost stories. You start telling parents you heard their kids' voices underground, you'll break them all over again. Henry leaned forward. And what about Emily? They left her labeled crazy. Karen's jaw clenched, because believing her meant believing the Ridge wasn't just a place. It was something else, and nobody wanted to admit that. That evening, Henry drove to the edge of town. The Ortiz family's ranch sat quiet, its fence posts leaning, the fields dry. Janelle's mother had waited at the search base until her body gave out. Now she was frail, hair white, eyes watery but sharp. She sat on the porch with a blanket over her knees when Henry approached. "I know you," she said, squinting. "You were one of the young ones." Back when they searched, Henry removed his hat, his throat tight. "Yes, ma'am." Henry Lark. Her gaze lingered on him. "Still chasing ghosts," he swallowed. "Still chasing answers." She looked out across the field, where dusk gathered in the grass. "The answers don't matter. Not anymore. We buried empty boxes, said our goodbyes. That's all we could do." Henry's chest ached. "What if I told you one of them came back?" Her head turned slowly. "Emily Santos." He blinked. "You knew?" The old woman gave a bitter laugh. "We all knew. But she was half dead, raving. Said the trail moved, said the ground swallowed kids. Sheriff told us she was traumatized, not to listen. Some believed him, some didn't. Didn't matter. She left town. That was the end of it." Her eyes met his, sharp despite the years. "You think digging this up will bring them home? It won't. You'll only feed it. Feed what?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The Ridge. It eats whatever looks back at it." Henry drove away with the words clawing at his mind. By the time he reached the motel, Emily was awake, sitting in the dark with her sketchbook open. She didn't look up as he entered. "You talked to them," she said. "Yes. And they told you to stop." Henry hesitated. "They told me it doesn't want to be fed." Emily lifted her gaze. In the lamplight, her eyes looked hollow, haunted. "That's the problem," she whispered. "It already has been." She turned the sketchbook toward him. On the page was a new drawing. Not the forest, not the canyon. It was Henry, standing alone in the clearing, recorder in hand. And behind him, the trees leaned close, their limbs curling like arms. Henry told himself he wasn't going back. He told himself as he shaved, as he sat in the motel diner with a plate of cold eggs, as he listened to the rain tapping the window. Barton Ridge had chewed up every cop who touched it. Karen had washed her hands of it. The families had closed their doors. Emily had warned him in her own fractured way, but the Ridge pulled like a riptide. By dusk he was back in his car, headlights cutting across the empty highway. Emily didn't ask where they were going. She sat silent in the passenger seat, sketchbook open on her knees. The forest swallowed the road. By the time Henry parked near the trailhead, the light was almost gone. They walked with flashlights, beams sweeping across wet leaves. The air was heavy with the smell of earth. Every sound carried too far, the crack of twigs, the rush of distant water. Henry's boots sank into mud. His chest felt tight, as though the trees pressed in on him. Emily stopped at the clearing. The rain had eased, leaving the grass shining. She crouched, touching the ground. "They stood here," she whispered. "All of them." The night before, Henry's throat was dry. "How do you know?" Her hand hovered above the soil. "I remember." A shiver crawled over him. She had never said it that plainly before. "Emily," he said carefully, "you told me you blacked out, that you never saw where they went." Her eyes lifted, wide and luminous in the flashlight beam. "That's what I wanted to believe." She straightened, pointing toward the canyon trail. It's waiting. The descent was steeper than Henry remembered. Mud slicked the rocks, roots catching at his boots. The canyon air smelled metallic, like wet stone and something faintly sweet, rotting. His beam swept across the canyon wall. For a second he thought he saw shapes cut into the stone, carvings, spirals, crude faces. Then the light shifted, and they were gone. "Did you see that?" he asked. Emily didn't answer. She was already farther down, moving as though pulled. "Emily!" He caught up, gripping her shoulder. She flinched, eyes glassy. "It calls," she murmured. Henry's hand tightened. "What calls?" Her lips trembled. "Them." At the canyon floor, water trickled between stones. The sound echoed like whispers. Henry's light caught something half buried in silt. He crouched, brushed it free. A shoe. Faded canvas, the sole gnawed by time. His heart lurched. He remembered the inventory lists. A boy named Tyler Crane, size 10 sneakers, white with red trim. The ridge hadn't devoured everything. Some things it spat back. He bagged the shoe with shaking hands. Emily stood a few feet away, staring at the canyon wall. "Look," she said. At first he saw only stone. Then the beam revealed an opening, narrow, jagged, half hidden by ferns. A cave mouth. Henry's pulse hammered. None of the maps, none of the search reports had shown a cave here. Emily's voice was low. "That's where I woke up. 16 years ago, the cave stank of damp and old earth. Their lights cut through hanging roots, glistening walls. The passage bent sharply, then widened into a chamber. Henry's beam swept across the floor. Bones, not human, at least not all. Deer skulls, bird wings, scattered vertebrae. But among them, a scrap of cloth, a rusted zipper. Emily's breath hitched. "They were here," she whispered. Henry crouched, his stomach roiling. He forced himself to photograph, to bag fragments. Procedure kept his hands steady. Behind him, Emily hummed. A low, tuneless sound. He turned. She stood at the far wall, her fingers tracing something carved into the stone. It wasn't random, not weathering, not scratches. 12 marks, vertical slashes. He counted them twice, dread growing heavier with each line. 12. Her voice broke. "We marked the days." Henry froze. "Emily?" Her hand dropped. "I remember now. We weren't lost. We were kept." The words sank like stones in his chest. He wanted to ask more, but then the recorder in his pocket clicked on. No one had touched it. Static filled the cave. Then layered voices, childlike, desperate. "Help us. It hurts. Don't let him." The rest tangled into distortion. Henry ripped the device out, switched it off, heart hammering. Emily swayed on her feet, her eyes unfocused. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They never left." Henry grabbed her arm. "We're leaving. Now." But the cave seemed to breathe around them. The air pulsed, damp and heavy. A low vibration shuddered through the floor, rattling stones. Emily's gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. "He's still here." Henry dragged her toward the opening. His flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed them. Emily's whisper was the only thing he could hear. "Run." The dark swallowed sound. Henry's flashlight was dead, his recorder silent, and the only light came from Emily's trembling hands as she struck a match. A weak flame flared, throwing monstrous shadows against the cave walls. The walls seemed to breathe. Damp air shifted in and out, like the exhale of something vast. Emily's voice quavered. "He's still here." Henry grabbed her wrist before the match died. "Who?" Her eyes gleamed in the thin light. "The one who kept us. The one who fed the ridge." The flame guttered out. Blind, Henry pressed Emily against the wall, forcing calm into his voice. "We go slow." Hand on the stone. Stay with me." They edged forward, shuffling along the damp passage. Water dripped rhythmically, echoing like footsteps. Then, another sound. Behind them. Soft dragging. Henry froze. His hand went to his holster by instinct, but the gun was locked in his motel drawer. He had nothing but the recorder, useless now, and his fists. The dragging grew louder, wet against stone. Emily whimpered. Henry pulled her forward. Faster. The tunnel bent, then widened. A faint glow pulsed ahead. They stumbled into a chamber. Faint light leaked through cracks in the ceiling, pale as moonlight. The walls glistened with mineral sheen. In the center lay a pit. Shallow, lined with bones. Some animal, some not. Henry's gut twisted. Emily dropped to her knees, fingers clutching her head. "This is where he made us choose." Henry knelt beside her, heart pounding. "Choose what?" Her voice cracked. "Who went next?" Before he could answer, the dragging sound entered the chamber. Henry spun toward the passage. Something stood there. It was tall, shoulders stooped, hair hanging in ropes. Skin pale, stretched tight. Its eyes caught the moonlight like an animal's. Henry's mind screamed man, just a man, wild, lost, feral. But the smell, rot, iron, wet earth, was not human. The figure staggered closer, dragging something behind it. Metal scraped stone. A chain. At the end of it, a rusted school backpack. Henry stepped in front of Emily. "Stay back!" The figure stopped. The air hummed. Then, in a voice like gravel, it whispered, "Still hungry." Henry's blood iced. The figure dropped the chain and lunged. Henry shoved Emily aside, grabbing a jagged rock from the floor. He swung. The rock connected with a wet crack. The figure reeled, but didn't fall. It laughed. The sound was thin, broken, a parody of joy. Emily scrambled to the pit, clawing at bones, pulling free a splintered femur. She swung wildly, striking its arm. The creature hissed, then retreated into the tunnel, dragging the chain with it. The sound of metal scraping faded into silence. Henry collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. Emily clutched the bone, eyes wild. "He let us go!" "He always lets some go." Henry stared at her. "Why?" Her lips trembled. "So they bring others back." The chamber shuddered. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Somewhere deep, a hollow boom echoed. "Cave in," Henry gasped. He pulled Emily up. "Move!" They ran, stumbling through passages. The floor tilted, rocks falling around them. Henry's lungs burned. Behind them, the dragging sound rose again. Closer, faster. Emily cried out as the ground split under her foot. Henry hauled her free, nearly falling himself. They burst into a narrower tunnel, light ahead, faint, but real. Daylight. They scrambled through a crack in the stone, emerging onto the canyon floor. The rain had stopped, the sky dim with dawn. Henry collapsed, gulping air. Emily lay beside him, face streaked with dirt, eyes wide. The forest was silent. No birds, no wind. Henry forced himself up. "We need to tell Karen." "The sheriff." Someone. Emily shook her head violently. "No, they'll bury it again. They'll say we imagined it. They always do." He grabbed her shoulders. "Emily, people need to know." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then more will come." "And he'll feed again." Henry's hands dropped. The truth settled like stone. She wasn't wrong. The ridge hadn't just killed, it had tended its hunger. And now Henry had seen it, heard it, fought it. That meant it knew him too. They limped back to the trailhead in silence. The car waited, dew slick, ordinary. But Henry felt the canyon's breath behind him, a weight that wouldn't leave. As he slid into the driver's seat, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, it wasn't his face staring back. It was the pale figure from the cave, mouth open, smiling. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee and mildew. Henry sat across from Sheriff Blaine, the recorder on the desk between them. Karen stood near the door, arms crossed, her jaw tight. Emily sat in the corner, her sketchbook clutched to her chest like armor. Blaine hadn't touched the recorder. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. "You're telling me you went back into Barton Ridge at night, without permission, and found—" He waved a hand, searching for the word. "A cave?" Henry's voice was flat. "Not just a cave. A pit, bones, a shoe." And Blaine's brow furrowed. "Him?" Henry stared at him. "You know damn well what I mean." The sheriff's silence was an answer in itself. Karen stepped forward. "Enough, Blaine!" The reports were scrubbed. I saw the originals. Ranger statements, compass malfunctions, McAllister's testimony. All gone. Someone made sure it looked like bad luck instead of what it was. Blaine's lips tightened. "That case ruined lives. Families demanded answers. When we couldn't give them, someone had to decide what was best for the town." Emily's voice, fragile but sharp, cut through. "Best for the town. Not for us." All eyes turned to her. She rose, holding out the sketchbook. Pages flipped beneath her trembling hands, drawings of the cave, the marks on the wall, the pale figure. She shoved it onto the desk. "I remembered," she whispered. "We weren't lost. We were kept. And when I got out, you called me crazy." Blaine's face flushed. He didn't look at the sketches. "You were 8 years old. You didn't know what you saw." Her voice rose, trembling with rage. "I knew enough to know it wasn't nothing." The room went silent. Henry leaned forward. "You buried the truth." "That's not protection, Blaine. That's complicity." The sheriff's gaze flicked toward the recorder. "And what's on that?" Henry pressed play. Static filled the room. Then the voice. "Stop running." Karen's hand went to her mouth. Emily flinched. Blaine's knuckles whitened on the desk. For the first time, his composure cracked. He snapped the recorder off. "You don't understand what you're playing with." Henry's eyes bored into him. "Then explain it." Blaine's silence stretched until it felt like the walls themselves leaned closer. Finally, he exhaled, shoulders sagging. "We thought it was a man. Just a man, some drifter. But he never aged. Searchers heard him whisper their names. We found claw marks inside caves deeper than any person could go. The ridge doesn't let go. It never has." His eyes lifted, weary. "We covered it because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't walk away. And if word spread, more kids, more thrill seekers, more lives. Better one town suffers in silence than hundreds." The fluorescent lights above flickered. A low hum vibrated through the floor. Emily's sketchbook pages fluttered as though caught in a wind no one else felt. Her voice was small. "It's here." Henry's skin prickled. He glanced at the window. Outside, the sky was clear. Yet the glass pane vibrated, a faint rattle like fingernails. Karen cursed under her breath. "Not here." Not now. The lights died. Darkness swallowed the room. In the black, the recorder clicked on by itself. Voices layered over each other. High, low, male, female, pleading, angry, desperate. "Help us. Don't let him—" "Still hungry," Emily screamed. Henry groped for her, clutching her arm. He felt her trembling, felt her nails dig into his sleeve. Then, in the dark, another voice. Close. Too close. "Henry." He froze, his wife's voice. Gentle, familiar, impossible. "Henry," it whispered again, "come with us." His breath hitched. He almost answered, almost stepped forward. But Emily's hand yanked his, grounding him. "Don't!" The lights snapped back on. The sheriff's office looked the same. Desks, filing cabinets, peeling paint. But the recorder was gone. And on the wall, gouged deep into the plaster, were 12 marks. Fresh. No one spoke. The only sound was Henry's heartbeat, pounding in his ears. Finally, Karen whispered, "Now, do you believe it doesn't stay in the ridge?" Blaine's face was gray. He pushed back from the desk, shaking his head. "Get out, all of you. If you keep digging, it'll eat you whole." Emily hugged the sketchbook to her chest. Her eyes were hollow, but steady. "It already has." Henry met Karen's gaze. Both of them knew. This wasn't over. The ridge had reached into town, and it wasn't letting go. 2 weeks later, the ridge was quiet again. The sheriff's office closed its blinds, the newspapers printed nothing, and the trail remained chained shut with rusting padlocks. Henry sat on his motel bed, staring at the recorder he had bought to replace the one that vanished. Its red light blinked. Patient, waiting. He hadn't pressed play in days. He didn't dare. Karen had gone back to Dallas, returning to her stack of unsolved files. She left without saying goodbye, though she sent a single text the next morning. "Don't let it take you." Emily stayed. Not in town. She wouldn't step near the sheriff's office again, but in the motel room next door. She walked the halls barefoot, sketchbook pressed to her chest, and at night, Henry heard her crying through the thin walls. She never screamed. Just soft sobs, like a child trying not to be heard. One morning, Henry found her on the curb outside, watching the sunrise. She looked fragile in the light, her dark hair tangled, her eyes red but dry. "They don't want it spoken," she said quietly. "No." But if no one speaks, it keeps feeding. Henry sat beside her. The silence stretched. "I thought," he said slowly, "if I could name it, record it, make someone listen, it would end." Emily shook her head. "It doesn't end. Not with truth. Not with silence." Her hand tightened on the sketchbook. "It ends when there's nothing left to take." The words chilled him more than any whisper in the dark. By the end of the month, he was packing his car. The motel's neon buzzed weakly behind him. The highway stretched ahead. He told himself he was leaving the ridge behind. That distance might mean peace. Emily stood on the curb, sketchbook hugged tight. "You'll be back," she said simply. Henry loaded the last bag. "Not if I can help it." She tilted her head. "It knows you now. It doesn't let go." Her voice wasn't angry, just certain. He couldn't answer. The drive east was long and flat. He tried not to glance in the rearview mirror, but sometimes he caught it anyway. The pale suggestion of a face, a smile that wasn't his. At a truck stop, he pulled over, hands shaking. He yanked the recorder from the passenger seat, thumb hovering over the power switch. If he pressed play, maybe he'd hear silence. Maybe it had all been madness, nothing more. But deep down, he knew. Once you heard the ridge, it stayed with you. Weeks later, on a damp October evening, Karen sat at her desk in Dallas, working through another cold case. A stack of files towered beside her, each one a life gone missing. Her phone buzzed, a message from Henry. No words, just an audio file. Karen hesitated, then pressed play. Static. Then a voice, not Henry's, not Emily's, a child's, thin and trembling. "Help us." Karen dropped the phone, her stomach lurching. She stared at it as the recording played on, voices layering, pleading, sobbing. Then silence. She didn't pick it up again. Back in Barton Ridge, the forest breathed. Leaves rustled, though no wind stirred. The canyon walls glistened with damp, and deep in the cave, fresh scratches marked the stone. 13.